18, 19. I think we're on 19. I think we did 18. If you had to give a recap of the 5th chapter, it would sound something like this. Things started out with a wrapping up of something that's been discussed the whole the entire Gita up till this point. And that was action versus renunciation. Whether you should have a passive relationship with the material world where you don't do anything, or you try to do as little as possible, or you shun entanglement, or whether you jump in and participate. Do you boycott the material world, or do you engage in direct action with the material world? Now, if you engage in direct action, you get entangled, you get caught up, you're in the rat race, you buy into the dualities of success and failure. If you renounce the world, then you can do a little good to help other people. You become a bystander. You don't fulfill your human potential. You don't make a difference. The upside of participating is you're vital and you're involved. The upside of renunciation is you don't get caught up. The downside of renunciation is you're a bystander. And all that it takes for evil to succeed is for good people to do nothing. And the downside of participating is you get all wrapped up. So the 5th chapter starts out, and the two words used for that are yoga and sannyas. And Arjuna, who's been wondering for chapters now, he's really just trying to grasp it. Sometimes if there's something which is deep enough or profound enough, or is there somebody out there? You can go check it out for me. Is it wind? I don't know. Is there something that's deep enough or profound enough or complex enough, then you might not get it the first 5 times you hear it. It might take a long time to click. You might just have to go over it again and again and again. It might take just a long time to click. And so I think that's what we're dealing with here. I think most people spend their lives not really being, having a comprehensive understanding of this topic and not being able to navigate expertly. And so that's how the 5th chapter starts. And Krishna weighs in. He weighs in favor of yoga, participating, but with the caveat that you should be detached, and therefore really he's recommending a combination of both. Participate, but don't get caught up in the results. And then he starts to explain how even though they're in the world, people who are striving for self-realization, even though they're using their bodies and they're waking up and making moves and blinking and using the bathroom and doing everything else, their purpose in life is self-realization. And as such, their experience of the material world is much different than someone who's trying to enjoy. The material world becomes a vehicle for them to pursue self-realization. And what normally ties you up to the world, interacting with people and situations, helps them to become detached because they have this purpose, and their purpose makes the material world a different experience, an experience where things that happen in this world help them become more detached. And then Krishna jumps into, most logically, there's no theism. If we're just going to take a real conservative view. And Krishna then begins to explain how you're really not your body. And there's some sense in which you're tied to this world through this thing called swabhav. But the truth is you are truly a soul in this world but who never really touches this world. And so it's all like a dream. Now that leaves the door open. We got to think about how we touch this world, or half touch this world, or kind of touch this world, even in a dreamlike state. And of course, unless God's a monster, we have to take responsibility for being in this world. And maybe minute to minute, we're not making decisions. We're being manipulated by our genetics, and we're being manipulated by the material, the environment. But on some sort of macrocosmic level, on some primal level, we turned away from truth, which of course means we can turn back towards truth. And then this darkness versus the light, and through knowledge, ignorance is destroyed at its root, and then the effects of swabhav, of nature, and avidya, or ajnana, ignorance, can't touch you anymore, and the sun illuminates. And then you start to look at everything in the world, and you see within the world that people are all spiritual, and that everyone's searching for to preserve life, and that community matters, and you stop judging people, even animals, even low-class people of terrible behavior. You're able to see the good in them, and see how they're not that different from you. Usually the things in other people that you find detestable and disgusting and repulsive, usually those are things that you got issues with. And you can't acknowledge them in yourself, and so you find them just distasteful, but like triggering in other people. Because you've got work to do in those areas. Have you ever noticed that? Somebody just really irks you, and then you talk to a friend, they're like, you're a lot like that person. You've got some of those same qualities. And then you get angry at them. You become disturbed at them. Can't stand the fact that somebody pointed that out to you. So as you become self-realized, the same thing happens. You start to see the good in you also is in other people. It's the flip side of it. And so instead of seeing the bad that you can't acknowledge in yourself in other people through projection, and being hyper vigilant towards the bad in other people that you can't acknowledge in yourself in some sort of quasi projection type situation, instead of that, you start to see the good in yourself, and you see the good in other people as well. So there's this action versus renunciation theme that gets settled really for the rest of the Gita, up until the 18th chapter when they recap and conclude the Gita. And then that segues into a discussion of a self-realized soul's experience of the world, and finally this idea that you have nothing to do with the world, and you're aloof from the world, and it's ajnana, ignorance, it's swabhav, it's nature that's causing all these birth, death, old age, and disease. Of course, that leads you to think, well, what's ultimately causing ignorance or swabhav? And so if you ask that question, then you don't necessarily have to get to an infinite regression. It's just they give you sites an intermediate level of blame to some external factor, but you have to answer the question, well, why am I tied to that external factor? It's not that question's illegal. And it's not that becomes an infinite regression model. You can still get to a primary cause, and the Gita, other places in the Gita recognize free will. And so you can certainly apply that here, but the Vedic texts don't spend a ton of time on that. On free will and the problem of suffering and how it's ultimately your fault and how you turned away from Krishna. They don't spend a ton of time on that the same way Western thought does. Western thought has to deal with the problem of evil. Evil's a way bigger animal. It's fundamental, malevolent, malefic stuff. And so you got to find a cause for that. And so when you got something like evil in your worldview, then there's no way to get around spending a lot of time figuring out where does evil come from. And Christian theologians by and large for 2,000 years who've been spending time on this exact topic, because they're a dualistic tradition. They believe in good and evil and heaven and hell, and Satan seems to be almost as powerful as God in their worldview, because they're vying for the control of the souls. But ultimately, what came out of that, thinking about that, is free will. The primacy of free will in our situation. Now, they only believe in one lifetime, so that jams them up for accounting for inadequacies you see between two children who couldn't have done anything to cause that to happen. There was an interesting question where somebody was born blind, and they asked if it was his fault or the fault of his parents he was born blind. Jesus evaded the question, but there was some acknowledgement that it could have been somebody else's fault, or it could have been that kid's fault. Maybe in the womb, he could have made some sin in the womb. Or maybe it's a reference to a previous lifetime. Certainly reincarnation wasn't, completely out of the pre-Christian Jewish worldview. Those ideas were there, they were around. Nowadays, the idea of reincarnation is considered to be completely foul in Christianity, but I've never really found anything in the Bible that was extremely prohibitive and of reincarnation, that it wasn't a possible worldview if you're just looking at the Bible. There's some, I think they're extrapolating as opposed to they have, it was a major topic within the biblical tradition. But anyway, ultimately where Christianity settled is on free will. And so there was some room to do some work with that. And although I mentioned these verses could apply to God or the soul, they best apply to the soul, because the whole text is about how you have nothing to do with this world, so it fits like a hand in a glove. The text can be interpreted differently, and there's enough nuance there with the vibhu and the prabhu to speculate, and it's reasonable to speculate. But if you want to just get a real conservative reading, Krishna explains how you really have nothing to do with this world. And it's ignorance, which isn't you, because you're naturally filled with knowledge. And if you accommodate, if you accomplish that, you bask in that, and you look towards that, then the ignorance melts away, and you're able to see reality. And what is that reality? You start to see the good in other people. I think that takes us up to where we are. And so we're on text 19. And now we're talking about these people, Pandita Samadarshana, the pundits who see the same everywhere. So we're talking about those from text 18, the pundits who see the same everywhere. They're able to see the same everywhere. And so that, we're building on that idea. Ihaivatai jita sarga, yesham samya, stitam manaha. So in this world, birth is transcended by them, whose minds are situated in equanimity. The people whose minds are situated in equanimity, those people are able to conquer, rebirth, reincarnation in this world. Nirdosham, hi samam brahma. Brahma is faultless and is equal. Tasmat brahmani te sita, and therefore they situate themselves in Brahman. So it's interesting that God is neutral. God is faultless. So then they become God-like by starting to look at the world. Like Krishna consciousness. I think the most obvious interpretation of Krishna consciousness is to become conscious of Krishna, to think about Krishna, to become aware of Krishna's presence. But Krishna consciousness can also be to adopt the same consciousness as Krishna, to view the world as spiritual, to view people as fundamentally good. And so Brahman is also situated in equanimity. Brahman is also faultless, and therefore the sages whose minds are situated in oneness or in equanimity, they situate their minds in Brahman. They think about Brahman. They meditate on Brahman because Brahman is the genesis of this equanimity that we say is the highest thing. So it's like, why is it better to see equanimity as being the goal? Well, logically, I mean, just reasonably, if you're neutral, you're not going to get as disturbed by the world. You want judges who are unbiased. That's why you have a voir dire process. You want police officers who are unbiased. That's why if a police officer is found guilty of being racist, his arrests all get called back up again. You want your police officers, you want your military, you want your juries, you want your judges, you want your referees to all be neutral. In many ways, that's their primary qualification, is their neutrality. They may also have to require some skill, but neutrality is right up there with whatever skill they have. And in fact, we know this because if you don't behave in a neutral way, and in a dispassionate way, in a fair way, according to the law, according to the rules, then everything you do becomes challengeable, and many times you've committed a crime. A judge who's found to be racist or biased or this or that, I think there's probably some. I mean, certainly there's civil crimes, but there may even be criminal offenses. Certainly, if a referee is found to call a fight in favor of his friend, that's illegal, no doubt. But I think in many situations where someone has the trust of the people, to not behave with neutrality is criminal. It's criminal. And so, why is it that we should be neutral? It's an interesting question. Why should I be, equanimous towards the world? One answer is, that's we value equanimity. You'll become less disturbed. But another answer is it's interesting. But let's say a police officer pulls you over, and you say, "Why are you pulling me over?" And he says, "You're speeding." And you go, "Well, why does that give you the right to pull me over?" And he'll say, "Well, the law." And he'll say, "Well, why do I have to follow the law? Why is the law something that we've decided to follow? It's just words on a piece of paper." Well, the city laws are deferential to the state laws, which are deferential to the federal law, which is deferential to the Constitution. That's how it works. And ultimately, why is it that we have to follow the Constitution? Because it represents the rules of the Creator. We were endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. And on that basis, the Constitution was written based on the idea that they were going to write down what God thought, what the Creator thought, what are the natural orders. You look at Magna Carta, which was a 12th century English document where you get ideas like habeas corpus, where you have to be brought, you can't just be held indefinitely. You have to be brought in front of a judge. Literally, habeas corpus means produce the body. You have to produce the body. So, rules of search and seizure and testimony. There's a whole bunch of stuff that came up in the Magna Carta. And all English law, Anglican law, follows in the footsteps of this. And many important concepts like castle law came out of that. So the man's home is his castle, and you can't just enter someone's property. Actually, that's how Trayvon Martin got killed, is in Florida, castle law, that you can defend your castle, you don't have to retreat, applies to your person. So if somebody approaches you on the street, you don't have to back up and take evasive action. In California, that's not the case. In California, if you shoot somebody dead and you could have walked out that door, you're guilty of a crime. in Florida, you have no obligation to walk out the door or ever back up. Your castle is you. You're walking down the street, and if somebody gives you guff and you feel threatened, you never have to retreat. They interpret castle law much more aggressively, that your castle is the immediate area surrounding you at all times, and you're never obliged to retreat. Did you know that? You know about this, right? I'm sure they didn't teach it like this in the police academy, but these basic ideas.
Yeah, it's called stand your ground.
Stand your ground, right?
There's a bill now they're trying to make a bill nationwide.
Stand your ground. Stand your ground is castle law. It's from the Magna Carta. It goes back near 1,000 years. I think it was King James, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure who the king was. I think it was King James. And so, yeah, we're going really far back. Not too far after the birth of England. Maybe a couple hundred years after the birth of England. We're going really far back in history. But yeah, ultimately, if you question, you go up the food chain, you'll get to the Constitution, and the Constitution gets you to, this is what God thinks. The Creator hasn't endowed you with certain... We hold these truths to be self-evident, that our Creator has endowed us with certain inalienable rights. It's a rights doctrine. This gets into social contract theory, and the idea that, you get certain rights given to you by a government, and then they're able to take away certain rights from you as well. So you can own property, for instance, or you're protected, but then at the same time you have to pay taxes, or you have to follow the rules of the road. And so there's some give. They protect these rights for you in a way that you couldn't. If you just had to protect yourself from every danger, it'd be rough. It's a rough world. It's the law of the jungle. So they establish civilization, and they build streets and schools and medical facilities, have an army. And then that costs you. You accept that certain of your rights are taken away for the preservation and the expansion of other rights. And there's a contract. And you buy into it by taking birth in a country. You buy into that social contract merely by the act of taking birth in that country. Interesting, right? So anyway, one argument, why should you be neutral? Is because God's neutral. I don't think it's the best argument, because if the person's questioning whether God exists or not, then it gets you nowhere. But it's not that it doesn't deserve to be said at some point in the discussion. The soul is neutral. It's who you really are. It's like, why should I use both my arms? Because you got them. You're made to use both arms. Why should I use my opposable thumb? Because you got an opposable thumb. It makes you different. It's good. It's valuable. Why should I walk instead of crawl? Because you can get places a lot faster. So it's a way better way to go about things. Why should I be equal? Because your nature is to be equal as a soul. And you'll be most happy. And you'll be you. Why is the soul equal? Because God's equal. And God created you. So depending on where somebody's at, you might make different arguments. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting. Is this Brahman here is sama. Brahman here is equal. And so, and in some ways that makes an argument that this equality, this equanimity, this neutrality is the nature of the self. It's the nature of God. It's the fundamental nature of the world. And you are engaging in the world in a twisted, perverted way by not being neutral. And so we need to untwist you to bring you back to your normal state of being. Did you guys follow this? It's an interesting idea, isn't it? Why should I be equal? Why this? Why that? Yeah, and you can see you'll be happier, you'll be more satisfied because you can't control the material world, because you suffer from anxiety, and it's a way better way to live, and you'll live longer and you'll be happier. There's a million arguments you can make, but another argument is because you are fundamentally a neutral bystander in this world. So you might as well get with the program and act your age. Act how you really are. Well, why am I made that way? Because God's that way. And therefore, when you get to this higher spiritual level, where you're neutral, it's natural for you to meditate on and think about and liaise with and come close to divinity. Because you are becoming who you truly are, who you've forgotten you were. And that opens the door for you to start to get very close to Krishna, very close to Brahman, very close to divinity. Do you guys follow this? Why don't you give me some feedback? I personally think this is very interesting. I've never noticed this and thought about this verse in this particular way. So I think it's quite interesting. I'd like some feedback. JC?
I've been thinking about this a lot, and I have a sort of related question, which is that if the soul has no gender and is neutral, but our
I didn't say the soul has no gender. You made a jump. You said the soul has no gender. I didn't say that. I don't know that being neutral means you have no gender.
I know it's not in the text, but it's
No, I'm not sure that the idea that the soul is genderless is in our tradition. Hey, do you believe the soul is genderless?
No.
No. There you go. It's like cold call to Hare Krishna, and right off the bat, he's not going for the genderless soul argument. So it's a jump. It's an extrapolation. It's not in the text. It's also not in the Gita. It's not in the text, not in the Gita. I don't even think it's in Indic philosophical thought. I can't think of a single place where I see it mentioned.
So is this soul eternally, like Bhaktivinoda Thakur is eternally Kamaramandi? So is the soul eternally one gender, or we're all feminine, but some people are Calvin boys? How do we understand?
I mean, that's a different question, but now you've departed now from the text.
Yeah.
So I don't want to have that conversation now. We can have that conversation. I don't mind, for sure. We'll do it offline. But I don't know that being neutral means, now if you're being absolutely neutral, then you'd have to be gender-free, for sure. Of course, absolute neutrality would also require you to be devoid of thought and free will. Because if you're completely neutral, and then there's no room for free will, there's no room for thought, there's no room for individuality in any way, because that takes you offline from being neutral. You follow? So glorifying neutrality as being this absolute thing that pervades every single thing to a superlative degree leads to impersonalism, which just has huge problems with it, because it can't explain the world of variety. I would argue, I am arguing with you, that to see divinity as gendered is most natural, because we find that gender exists in, practically speaking, every species, plant and animal. And even when we look at hermaphroditic beings, then they end up having both. They end up having both, I guess, haploid gametes. They can reproduce. But they're still sex. They have both sexes. Now there are cells that just divide, and there are like some simple forms of like RNA, like viruses and stuff like that just, attach themselves to a host parasitically. And there's some simple forms of life. They're just, single cell organisms that are devoid of any genitalia, so to speak. But at a certain point of sophistication, all forms of life become gendered. I would argue that that's because the absolute is gendered. And we like to talk about the creation of the world in gendered language. Krishna says, Mama Yoni, my womb. Dadami Garbham, I placed the seed in my womb. I place the seed in my womb. I'm the mother and the father of the universe. And so Krishna claims both genders for himself, calls himself the mother and father of the universe, and in fact uses like the imagery of sexual intercourse to describe on a macrocosmic level the creation of the world. And I would argue that the ubiquity and the all-pervasiveness of gender we see within this world, like I said, every sophisticated form of life, is because that variety exists within the absolute. And therefore we worship the divine as the divine feminine and the divine masculine, not as the divine neutered. That's, if I was going to make an argument, which I did, that's what my argument would sound like. It's not if. I just made an argument. There's my argument. You want to respond?
I think that was really key. And if we bring it to this text, that absolute neutrality is sort of impersonal, like you said. But
whenever something is brought up, Brahman is equal. You are equal. You are one with Brahman. You are equal to God. You are divine. Whenever something like that is brought up, a monistic idea, an idea where things are the same, the first thing you have to ask yourself is, are we absolutely the same? In other words, the first thing you ask after that says, how far do we go with that we're the same? Like somebody could say, we're one blood. What do they mean when they say that, we're one blood? It's kind of a famous, Rasta saying. We're one blood. What does that mean? Does it literally mean that we have the same blood type and that we share a body like Siamese twins? No, it means we're all human beings and we all have the same kind of blood coursing through our veins, and so we should have some feeling of familyness, familial feeling towards people in the world who might be from different groups, right? But if you were to take that one blood thing too far, it becomes absurd. Or if two criminals got arrested, and you're like, hey, take him away, don't take me away. They go, no, you guys are the same. That doesn't literally mean that you guys are exactly the same. It just means that you guys both committed that crime, and therefore you're both being arrested. So we'll oftentimes speak of sameness or oneness, but we don't mean an absolute oneness. And to postulate an absolute oneness would be absurd. And so you have to look at the context of statements that are made. I mean, here, Brahman is the same, but yet they're absorbing their minds in Brahman to become Brahman-like. If they're absorbing their minds in Brahman to become Brahman-like, then Brahman is different than them in that they weren't Brahman-like, and now they're becoming Brahman-like, and Brahman was always Brahman-like because it was Brahman. If I absorb my mind in the divinity and become divine, and either by absorbing my mind in divinity, I become divine, or by becoming divine, I'm able to better absorb my mind in divinity. We can go both ways on that one. That doesn't indicate that I am absolutely exactly the same as the divine that I'm meditating on or thinking about. For instance, what if that divine is the creator of the universe? Do I now become the creator of the universe? No. In fact, the mere argument that I'm now absorbing in my mind in Brahman and becoming like Brahman indicates there's at least one difference between me and Brahman. Namely, I wasn't absorbed in Brahman, and now I'm becoming absorbed in Brahman, and therefore I'm a different type of Brahman than that Brahman. We have a lot in common, but that's one thing we don't have in common. Do you follow this? So a lot of times when you try to go to an absolute level with oneness, an absolute oneness, it's called Kevala Advaita, an absolute oneness, a pure oneness, a complete oneness between the soul and God, for instance, it becomes absurd. So what you're left with is you're spiritual, Krishna's still the creator, you're still the created. It's like a flame and a spark of that flame. It's like a ray of light and the sun. We use different metaphors to explain it. But Krishna is still a singularity who has important distinctions between himself and you. And so it's important when you read about oneness that you don't think that now every idea of oneness I could ever come up with in my mind must be what this verse is saying, which is what you did. But that's not fair. And so you have to argue for the types of oneness you want to talk about. And in fact, that's what's going to happen here. Krishna's going to start talking about types of oneness. So let's get into the verse a little bit. Those whose minds are established in sameness and equanimity have already conquered the conditions of birth and death. They are flawless like Brahman. And thus they are already situated in Brahman. A person who neither rejoices upon achieving something pleasant, nor laments upon obtaining something unpleasant, who's self-intelligent, who's unbewildered, and who knows the science of God, is already situated in transcendence. So he's Brahmanistita. He's situated in Brahman. Why? Because he's Brahmavit. He knows Brahman. He's a samudho. He has no doubts. He's sthirabuddhi. He's got a steady mind. And he doesn't get agitated when getting something good or when he's getting something bad. So that's describing neutrality in the way that you relate to things in this material world. Right? It's a very specific type of neutrality that's not as far-reaching as what you said. You follow? And so Krishna's articulating now what he means when he says neutral, what he means when he says equanimous, what he means when he says to be situated in equanimity. And it's less ambitious than what you said. Yeah. By the way, to give you an example, let's say God is all-powerful. Yes, he's all-powerful. That means not a blade of grass moves without God's permission. Okay? That means every thought you have, God permits. Okay? That means you're dependent on God at every moment for your existence. Okay? God's all-powerful. That means every thought you have ultimately comes from God. You just slipped into determinism. And now all the evil of the world becomes God's fault. Because you have no independence. But if you have any independence whatsoever, God's no longer all-powerful. You follow? So we mean God's all-powerful, except for he doesn't interfere with your free will. Well, then that's not all-powerful. That's correct. When we say all-powerful, we mean all-powerful except he doesn't interfere in your free will. Now, if we're focused in a bunch of texts on talking about how powerful God is, we might skip making this point, and we're just talking about how powerful God is, and then you can start to extrapolate from that, and you can wind up in a pickle, in a real philosophical impasse, where every evil thing that ever happened is God's fault. Does that make sense? So you have to theologize carefully. And you have to check how far you can go. Like walking out on a frozen lake when maybe the ice isn't completely thick. You're a little careful. You're looking for cracks and you're looking to see some holes. You're walking. You got to walk, but you're walking carefully. You got a stick in front of you. You're poking the ground with the stick in front of you. You're making sure that ground is solid and you're walking a little gingerly to make sure you don't go too far. Are you guys following this? Ross.
So is this kind of saying that like you find detachment
I mean, I think the detachment from your dopamine reward systems, your mesolimbic pathways, and such. I think that that will be the result. I think it starts off more intellectual. It can work the other way. I spoke too soon. It could work either way. I think we can have an idea. Just look at your own life. We gave you a list of rules that you should follow, and you decided I should follow these rules, and your body wasn't caught up with that, and it took a while for your body to catch up. So your desire to follow the rules that we follow was intellectual, and then you beat your body into submission. Yes or no? Alternatively, you could just hang out with us, maybe go to India with us, and there's only vegan food around, and we're all hanging out all day, every day, and there's no time to do any nonsense, and you can't get an internet connection to look at pornography, and there's nobody around to sleep with, and there's no meat around to eat, and we're like all over you 24/7, so you can't get any drugs, and there's no alcohol, and we're like almost strong-arming you, and you're hanging out with us, right? And you have no necessary desire to follow our rules. But we're just modifying your behavior by controlling your physical space. Could that also result in those adjustments being made to your reward centers and your neurochemistry? It could. It could. You simply can't engage in negative behaviors, and so you're forced to chill out and sober up. And then, a few weeks go by, and you're on tour with us, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, I feel so much better than I did before. I'm way less addicted than I was before, right? It could work like that too. So I don't think it has to be that necessarily this means you rewire the circuitry in your brain. I do think a result of self-realization will be that you, to some extent, transcend that. Yeah. And it gets controlled, but that could be a neurotransmitter brain system correlate, but that doesn't necessarily prove causation. Correlation doesn't necessarily prove causation. And so the fact that you made a decision to get involved in spirituality, which then resulted in you rewiring some of the circuitry in your brain and maybe transcending some of the patterns of your earlier life. That doesn't mean that the idea of spirituality is merely neurochemical. It doesn't mean that the inspiration had its genesis in your neurochemistry. You could have had a dangerous idea, and then that could have resulted in you changing the way your brain works. Does that make sense? Or it could have changed the chemistry, and then the desire disappeared. I usually find the people I work with, it's the first one. You make a decision, and then you develop a better way to live. Does that make sense? And so, sure, I think there's value in looking at things from a neurochemistry point of view. I think it's very illuminating to look at prolactin and dopamine and serotonin and oxytocin and those kind of neurotransmitters, or neurotransmitter-like chemicals, and how they interact with your brain and how they result in various types of addictions, and how you have to find better ways to get your dopamine hits, more sustainable ways to get your dopamine hits. I think there's value in that, actually. But I don't find that that's where we get people. We convince them of a dangerous idea that God exists, that you're a spirit soul, and then they start to think, let me live like that. And then it gets easier as time goes on. Your resolve counts for something too. If you've got steely will, then even something hits you hard, you can withstand it. You can gut it out. You can white knuckle it. You can make it through. And so there's also some value in that. I always make this point to people. At some point in life, you're going to have to white knuckle it and just sink your teeth in and hold on. And not take the coward's path. Not shy away from the challenge. So I think there's room for all of this. Does that answer your question? Yeah, it's a good question. You good? Okay. Such a liberated person is not attracted to the material sense pleasures, but is always in trance, enjoying pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. Sukham akshayam ashnute. He attains never-ending happiness. Because he's Brahma Yoga Yuktatma. He's yogad. His self is yogad to Brahman. Vindati Atmanam Yat Sukham. He finds happiness within himself. Because he's asaktatma, bahya sparsheshu. He's unattached to external sensual pleasures. And he's finding happiness within himself. And because he's yoked to Brahman, who's ostensibly also in yourself or spiritually you can connect to, then there's an unlimited source of happiness. This is interesting, isn't it? It's an argument that there's a burning yes, an actual joy that supersedes and sublimates and transcends the lower pleasures that you were previously addicted to. And that gives you this higher transcendental enjoyment, which enables you to withstand the pressures of the external world. It's good, right? An intelligent person does not take part in the sources of misery which are due to contact with material senses. Such pleasures have a beginning and an end, and so the wise man does not delight in them. Nateshu ramate buddhaha. The Buddha, the enlightened person, naramate, he doesn't find happiness, teshu, in those things. In what things? Yehi sangsparsha ja bogha. Certainly, contact of the senses and their sense objects results in enjoyment. Dukkha yonaya evate. And it also becomes the womb of your suffering. If you touch material things, see material things, taste material things, and find your happiness from those things, then that very thing that gave you happiness will also give birth to. It becomes the womb that gives birth to dukkha. Yea, for those people who sangsparsha ja bogha, who find enjoyment in sense objects, dukkha yonaya evate, it becomes the womb of their misery. That act of enjoying. Why? Adi anta vanta kaunteya. Because it has a beginning and an end. And in the beginning it's tasty, and in the end it's miserable. Nateshu ramate buddha. It's wise people, they don't do that. This all favors this cognitive reframing, doesn't it? It's a cognitive reframing, right? I got this idea. I'm going to stop looking outside for pleasure. I'm going to start looking within for pleasure. There's a higher happiness within. Best kept secret in town. There's a better happiness within. Smart people do this math. Just like, some people get so lusty that they have unprotected sex and get AIDS from unprotected sex. Or they get HIV and, without ART therapy it would turn into AIDS. Without antiretroviral therapy, which pretty much cures AIDS now, keeps it in the bands and keeps you HIV positive without having to progress to HIV 3 where you become susceptible to any number of different diseases which can affect somebody and kill somebody who's immunocompromised. It's just pretty simple, right? You don't want to get AIDS, don't have unprotected sex. I'm not arguing for contraception. I'm just making an observation. don't share needles. Under no circumstance, ever share a needle. Under no circumstance, ever have unprotected sex. Problem of 8 solved. But people just get so crazy with lust. They get so crazy with craving drugs, they share needles. Or they just don't use contraception. They just get so psycho. So everybody has some level on which they can exercise some restraint, some executive function, some self-control. And now we're just talking about a much higher level of that thing that you've already experienced in your own life, such that you could think, yeah, that was crazy. Why would people do that? Who would ever share a needle? Would you ever share a needle? No. If you became a heroin addict, would you ever share a needle? No. So it's like, forget it, right? But sometimes people just get so spun. They're like, hey, I gotta shoot up. There's no needles around. All right, I'll share this needle. It's like insane, right? Like, why would you ever do that, right? Because you're just that freaked out. You gotta like bust a move. Gotta make it happen. Let's just take it to another level. I'm not going to get involved in enjoying the material world. I'm here for a purpose. I'm going to each keep body and soul together. I'm going to work as I'm obliged, but I'm not getting all sunk into the material world. I'm not buying into the illusion. It's a radical position, right? But it's not that difficult to understand the logic of it. I'm looking for something deeper. I'm looking for something higher. I believe that higher thing exists. I'm searching after that. I'm dedicating my life to that. And because I'm dedicating my life to that, I'm in training. Mike Tyson used to be celibate when he was training. Just regular old schmoes doing their thing. People can exercise incredible self-control when they have something that they want to do. Stay up all night studying for a test. Stay up all night doing a book report. People are capable of tremendous austerities when they feel that those things are important. And so what we're talking about is people who decide that spirituality is important. And they make a decision. I'm not going to engage there. I'm going to engage in here. And there's unlimited happiness in here. And you become divine-like. And also by taking shelter of the divine, you become divine-like. And there's another option in how you engage with the material world. Trying to extract enjoyment out of it, or just using it as a platform to explore spiritual enjoyment. And so Krishna's he's making an argument. He's describing the phenomenon, and at the same time he's making some arguments in favor of this position. Some of it's descriptive, some of it's prescriptive. Both things are there. You have prescriptions here, you should do this, and you also have descriptions. This is what the self-realized soul is doing. But it also sounds like this is what we should be doing. And this is a better way to live. It's an objective description of what self-realization looks like, what Krishna's trying to teach Arjuna self-realization looks like, but it's also prescriptive in the sense that it's attractive and it presents a compelling argument. Thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I always kind of reminds how, self-realization is self-sustaining, which you don't really think that, and that's why I'm appreciating how Krishna said.
Krishna consciousness is fun. It's fun. It's self-sustaining. It's also fun. It's exciting. It's adventurous. It's beautiful. It's attractive. It's gorgeous. It's inspirational. Really, at a certain point, we want to fall in love with Krishna. Before that, we fall in love with the process. It's more abstract, but it's more immediate. You fall in love with a process, with a lifestyle. That eventually leads you to fall in love with the person who is the object of pursuit in that lifestyle. These are very powerful catalysts to bring out the best in you. That makes sense? Good. More? Yeah.
Thank you for this. When you explain sameness and equanimity, it sort of made me realize that in my profession as an auditor, one of the things we do, right, we audit financials and we say, yes, the investor can trust it because that's true. So one of the tenets we have is we have to be independent and objective.
Yeah, I mean, you hire a third-party auditor to come in and audit because the people who in the company will never audit it properly. And so even if you have a full accounting team, when you have to do regular audits of your business, you can't use your internal accounting team because it's understood that they may be subject to bias because they might be chasing a promotion and the CEO might give them a promotion. And so it's just, you always have to hire a third party. I mean, you want to get your cell phone plan changed. They bring a third party on the phone to make sure you weren't coerced into changing your cell phone plan. You buy an insurance policy, they give you 10 days. You buy a plane ticket, they give you a day or two to unwind the thing. There's all sorts of these, buyer's remorse clauses, or to make sure that you're doing it for the right reason. They're built into even small decisions in this world because we value neutrality. Because it puts you in a superior vantage point. The whole idea of a shrink, they shrink your problem down. They can describe it in objective terms because they're standing aloof from it. We value this. Yeah.
It's really helpful for them to this equanimity, sameness being something to strive for, that God is like that. It really put it into perspective for me then, sort of saying, well, when I practice it in Krishna consciousness, I sort of have that practice because I've done it at work.
I'm down to 2 minutes. I'll let you talk in a second. I want to wrap this up for IGTV. This stuff is meant to be applied in your life. You're meant to be a little more chill with your teachers, and a little more zen, and a little more zen with irate customers, and a little more zen with your family. You're meant to just to take this stuff and go home with it and start to think about, I need to be more detached. I need to be more unbiased. I need to be more neutral. I need to stop getting caught up in the rat race and the ups and downs and friends and enemies, attraction and repulsion. I need to perform an austerity of starting to live like a spiritualist and not getting so bent out of shape about stuff in the world. Let me start small, but I'm on a path, and it's been articulated what the goal of that path is on a continuum where you want to head to, unlimited happiness within yourself, not looking to external sense objects. And then I'm here, but I'm not over here. I'm here. It's a continuum. So I'm here, but I want to get here, and that's far away. So I'm going to just start moving and just getting a little better. And as the years go on, I should be able to, I used to struggle with this, and I don't struggle with that anymore. And I would watch people struggling with this, and I was like, wow, I never got there. If I could ever get there, that's like self-realization. Now I'm there, and I'm struggling with those things. And then I could see further. And I'm moving through life, becoming more detached, becoming more zen, becoming more neutral, falling in love with Krishna, letting go of the material world, finding my happiness within, finding my joy within. I'm working on that. This is meant to be practically applied in your life. It's practical. It's high, but it's practical. You can start to go back to the world, and you can start to apply some of these principles. Thank you. Back to you, Hidden.